Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Do you know what the easiest thing in the world is? The easiest thing in the world is to encourage each other not to be decent, not to be nice, not to be compassionate. I don't particularly expect you to care a fig about the fate of prisoners caught up in the middle of riots, but how about the prison officers? Can we not spare a thought for them? Because I'll tell you now, and I'll tell you straight, what is happening in British prisons at the moment, what happened in HMP Birmingham over the course of the weekend, is precisely what happens when a workforce are not allowed to go on strike. Prison officers up and down the land have been trying now for years to warn you, and more pertinently the government, that a time bomb was ticking. I think it might be about to go off. Well, because I've got this thing in front of me called a phone. I've got this thing in front of me called a switchboard. I have this wonderful ability to offer a degree of anonymity to people who work within a profession that has no platform. You'll remember the Prison Officers Association called some form of industrial action earlier this year. You'll remember the usual suspects in my profession were queuing up to condemn and criticise them for doing so. And you'll be aware that it was reduced to or confined to a so-called day of protest in a dispute over health and safety concerns. Health and safety, remember? That's another thing that's been demonised by right-wing newspapers in the last few years. Health and safety concerns are what prison officers express when they're warning against riots that could leave them dead and bloodied on a corridor floor. But of course they can't go on strike, so all they could do was hold a day of protest. Did we listen? Did the Ministry of Justice take the blindest bit of notice? Well, let me just remind you how they responded to that day of protest back in November. It was middle of last month, no less. The Ministry of Justice has said the industrial action is unjustified and unlawful. The Justice Secretary Liz Truss was warned 2 months ago that a riot at HMP Birmingham was probably going to happen. She was even told why it would happen: shortage of staff and a prevalence of psychoactive drugs. This by the Independent Monitoring Board. Independent. Who needs independent monitoring boards? Found that officers at the jail, and I quote, feared for their personal safety. That's from 2 months ago. Health and safety is human beings fearing for their personal safety. And it went on to warn that they were terrified of a so-called Mamba attack. This is because one of the so-called legal highs that are, of course, no longer legal and are running rampant in our prisons is known as Black Mamba. It was on Friday, of course, that the worst prison riots in Strangeways in 1990 unfolded. Just listen to these numbers, more than 600 prisoners running rampant for 12 hours, setting fires, battling specially trained tornado squad officers, chaos, warnings of a prison service in meltdown, systemic staff shortages, violence on the increase. There's been an alleged murder, there's been 3 large-scale riots, and there's been, of course, 1 escape as well. So what do we do together today? We are in this quite weird position, oddly, of having an awful lot of listeners. It must be slightly unrepresentative, mustn't it? I don't know what percentage of the population has actually been to prison, but whenever I confine the conversation to people who've spent time in prison, the phones ring off the hook. I don't know, maybe if you're probably a little less shy, perhaps, if you've spent time in prison, whereas most people sit with the radio on and don't always feel compelled to contribute. Or it's just something that you're supremely well qualified to discuss, and you also know that the massive majority of people listening, including me, by the way, are not very well qualified to discuss these matters, so you feel duty-bound almost to call in and contribute. Let's make a list then of the things that are the problems, and then we can work out what the biggest problems are. I would have thought staffing. I would have thought austerity cuts. I would have thought that yet again that attempt to try and sort of say that because of Gordon Brown and the international global meltdown in 2008, we had to take money off teachers, we had to take money off doctors, we had to take money off police officers, all of these people personally responsible for the global meltdown, so we need to issue cuts to the prison service as well. That leads to staff shortages. Do you know how much you might get paid if you started work as a prison officer tomorrow? Now, all I've done is Google this, so if I've looked at the wrong place or I've got it slightly wrong, then you will, as always, pile in to correct me. You're looking at a starting salary in some areas of just north of £16,000. Now, there's a lot of talk at the moment about people being out of touch, about people being left behind, about people not understanding the concerns of ordinary people, whatever that means. The weirdest thing about it is that those of us who've been speaking up for the exploited, for the poorer in society, for the dispossessed, have been completely ignored for years until you manage to blame it all on immigration. Then suddenly we care about the homeless. Suddenly we care about the poor. Suddenly we care about the left behind. Suddenly we care about the dispossessed. Suddenly we care about, quotes, our own, end quotes. But this one here, right here, this is actually traffic stopping. I am so out of touch. They asked me, we had a chat this morning, what do you reckon the starting salary is, James, for a prison officer? If I hadn't told you already the answer, what would you have said? Tell me honestly, what would you have said? Starting salary for a prison officer in Britain today. What would you have said? 25? I said 28. I don't know where I got that figure from. It just seemed to me that it's a profession that presumably involves a degree of risk and danger, and in order to recognise that risk and danger, I'd quite like to see a suitable reward. I'm not profligate with public money, but I certainly don't see why working in the public sector should mean you get treated worse than those in the private sector. I would like to think you got treated better because it's a government, a society's decision about how public sector workers get treated rather than just a boss or a billionaire's. 28, I said. I was out by a factor of almost 100%. £16,000 is the starting salary. £16,000. And it goes up to roughly the area where I guessed it started. So when you've been in the job for a few years, you might be earning just south of £30,000. But that's what's about £8 an hour, is it? 16 grand? On what possible planet are you going to expose yourself to a mamba-crazed murderer who's determined to wreak revenge for the way society has abandoned him upon this spotty youth in a uniform that's turned up outside his prison door? I mean, of all the people that I'd bend over backwards trying and failing to persuade the great British public to have some sympathy for, of all the people that we've failed to properly explain need the support of the public in recent years, surely prison officers would be near the top of that list. Okay, so we've been turned against the junior doctors. Okay, so we've been turned against the teachers. Okay, so we've been successfully turned against police officers. We've been successfully turned against public sector workers of every hue and cry. We've been successfully turned against just about everybody. It's the only way you can sustain the con that austerity is necessary, is to make everybody hate on everybody else. But surely prison officers, unless you're actually a prisoner with a grievance, these people have got the job from hell. And this government and the last government appear to have contrived to make it even worse. You've been telling me for years that prisons were going to kick off. Because I'm a sort of naive, do-gooding lefty, I chose to believe you, and now it's coming true. And yet, you know that the politicians responsible for this mess will walk away. Who are the last three Justice Secretaries? Is it Gove, Grayling, Liz Truss? Does it go in that order? Gove, Grayling, Liz Truss? I think it is. All of them. And Grayling's been promoted. Gove will be back eventually. And Liz Truss, of course, stayed absolutely silent when the Daily Mail chose to describe independent judges as enemies of the people, but has spoken about the prison rioters facing the full force of the law. Listen, Mrs. Truss, there is no full force of the law if the Justice Secretary doesn't support the judiciary when it's under attack from a horribly, horribly biased media. The full force of the law is dangerously diluted if you stay silent when judges are lampooned for being, amongst other things, gay fencers by one of the best-selling newspapers in the country. The full force of the law is losing power every minute if you don't actually stand up for judges. But there we are. Prisoners rioting. Yes, I'm going to make really powerful speeches about this. Prison officers needing help. I'm going to be a little bit more quiet about that. I'll tell you what I might do. I might stand up at conference and say that we're going to hire lots of ex-soldiers to work in prisons, because the people who attend conferences like that are so stupid and so sheep-like that they'll applaud the words without actually bothering to employ any form of thought to see whether it's plausible. That was the Home Secretary, right? That was Amber Rudd, wasn't it? Saying that she's going to employ loads of ex-soldiers to work in prisons, or was that Liz Truss herself? I'll double-check. May have been during the speech that Amber Rudd also channeled Mein Kampf to suggest that firms should have to list all the foreign workers they employ as well. Are you seeing a theme yet? Oh, over there, foreign workers. Ooh, boo, while our prisons are in meltdown. 12 minutes after 10. What's the problem? Call me now and tell me. What is the problem? If you're a prison officer, I want to issue an apology. I think our country has turned its back on you. I think you do a job. I'm sure some of you are pretty grim characters. I mean, you've got to be to do a job like that. But most of you, I imagine, are doing it because it's the job you do to get food on the table and the kids in shoes. Most of you are doing it just to pay the rent or the mortgage. Being a prison officer a vocation in the way that I bet it was back in the day, but I bet it is fast not becoming that now. What is the actual problem? What's it like? I'll tell you what I'd love to know, if you've been inside relatively recently. Would you be a prison officer? If you've been a prisoner, would you be a prison officer? How does the job look to you from that side of the cell door? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. That's a good way into it. 0345 6060 973. If you are a prisoner, or not now, although of course you can call in, albeit that you'd probably be using an illegal device to do so. If you've been in prison, the more recently, the more relevant, obviously. What's it like? How bad is it compared to, for example, 10 years ago or 20 years ago? 0345 6060 973. And why has it deteriorated so much? But I want to find a way, and I haven't found it yet, of focusing this conversation actually on the prison officers. Everybody else in the media will be inviting you to pile in on the rioting prisoners. Everybody else in the media in Britain will be giving you an opportunity to endorse ignorant and ill-informed but very, rhetorically powerful ideas about prisoners. Let's lock them up. Well, they're already locked up, you prune. Oh, all right, let's throw away the key. If you throw away the key, the likelihood of a riot increases exponentially. Let's, put them all on chain gangs. I mean, that works. We know that works. But it doesn't help the prison officers. Most important lesson I learned from you with regard to prisons was when I used to be a little bit tempted by some of that lazy right-wing knee-jerkery that everyone else does so well. And I used to think, the TVs, why have they got a telly in their prison? Why have they got a PlayStation? They're prisoners. They should... And a prison officer told me, not actually on air, it was someone who'd recently left the service and become a private hire driver. And he said, if they didn't have televisions, James, he says, I listened to your show. He said, can I just tell you, whenever they talk about it being Butlins or it being a holiday camp, if they didn't have televisions, they'd kill us. If they didn't have televisions, they wouldn't sort of go on a rampage looking to murder, but they would be so bored and so angry, and the frustration would build up to such a degree that we wouldn't be able to control a prison. A prison without televisions would be feral. It would be Dickensian. It would be Victorian. And yet, how long until you open up your newspaper or turn on your telly and see someone spouting the same old nonsense about, prisons are holiday camps? Do you know what doesn't happen at Butlins? At Butlins, generally, people don't hang themselves every 4 days, which is what's happening in prisons now. I'm not the man to make you feel sorry for prisoners. I'll have a crack at that another day when I've had a longer run-up. But if you don't feel sorry for prison officers, what planet are you inhabiting? So, how did this happen? 0345 6060 973 can be as simplistic or as complicated as you please. I'm really interested in what it is about these drugs that has caused such problems. I told you before, I met a murderer in another job that I do who'd been released. He'd been inside for the grimmest crimes you can imagine. And he told me that when he first smoked spice, he'd never been so frightened in his life. Some people have a reaction to it that is almost comatose. And he said, I couldn't move. I'm lying on the floor. There's two sections of society where these psychoactive substances have taken a death hold upon the population: the prison and the homeless. And I imagine it's for the same reason. I imagine it's because your existence is so bleak that oblivion is preferable. Even if it's oblivion that comes with all manner of hangovers, all manner of health problems, even if it's oblivion you wake up in your own urine-soaked trousers. But oblivion is preferable to reality on such a level that the rest of us will probably struggle to grasp just how stark that division is. It's 10:16. Let's get the phones up. 0345 6060 973. What's it like to be a prison officer? You can tell me either as a prison officer or as a prisoner. And I really need you. I think these men and women on £8 an hour. £8 an hour. What's happening to us? It's 10:17. It's not even complicated. It's just, of course, I increasingly feel like a stuck record. It's just, of course, that the facts aren't reaching the people. So if I asked you approximately what you think had happened in the prison service in recent years, let's just say for the sake of argument, since 2010, okay? How much money do you think has been taken out of their spending during that period? £900 million of cumulative savings. This is the National, the National Offender Management Service. The cost of a prison place is down by 18%. Great news. Soften it up for privatisation. And prison officers, in some cases, are earning £8 an hour. I mean, I'm struggling to find the question I need to ask to unlock this. Increasingly find myself wondering why we're getting cross about... What are we getting cross about today? Is it foreign aid yet? Is it foreign aid again today? Let me check. Yeah, foreign aid and strikers. 30% decrease in the number of staff employed in the public prison estate in the last 6 years, okay? So that's 13,720 fewer staff looking after nearly 450 more people. Why? Well, I suppose if you're being charitable, it's because people actually had some faith in austerity, and if you're being uncharitable, it's because you can't sell off prisons when they've actually got a cost-benefit ratio that looks realistic or reasonable. James is in Sheffield. James, what the hell is going on?
Oh, well, James, it's I started in the prison service in 2007, and I left last year. When I first started that job, it was the greatest job in the world. I would never have done anything else. It was brilliant. You had some successes, you had some failures, you had people that came in, and you knew for a fact, it might be the cynical side of me, some of them, they came in, and you knew for a fact you'd see them again and again and again and again and again. Some of that down to where they just had nowhere to go, no help, nothing, literally nothing. We used to kick them out of the gate with £46 in the pocket, and just went on your way.
And these will, I mean, historically and indeed statistically, these will be people who've had troubled upbringings. They're more likely to have been victims of abuse. They're more likely to be dyslexic or unable. And you're describing people who can't really function outside of an institution.
Yeah, they just can't. Some of them have been in care since being 2-3 years old, and they've been constantly looked after by the state since being a child.
Looked after in the loosest sense of the phrase, of course.
Yeah. I mean, you. For example, I used to compare it to when people who say these are adults, but these adults have been constantly looked after by the state and have no choice. So basically, when you're kicking these people out, they may be 30-year-old men, but in their head, they're still 12-year-old boys, what they were when they got kicked out. They've still got that sort of outlook on the world. From the prison services point of view, when I started in 2007, we had 70 to 80 prisoners on my landing, and there was around 5 prison officers to look after them prisoners. Now, they don't sound like good odds, but in this day and age, they are worth fantastic odds. Yeah. When I left last year, there was 2 of us to 120 prisoners.
Did you know, just stop, because you say it so calmly and so casually, because you knew it and you lived it and you saw it. That is, I mean, it's almost like there's no point having this phone in or this conversation. What's happened in our prisons? What's going on? You just told us what's going on. Now, you reduce what was already a relatively low ratio, and you halve it, actually more than halve it. You quarter it, and you wonder why things kick off.
Yeah, so what they did is they upped the prison numbers, so they upped the amount of prisoners we could take per wing, and then they lowered the staff to 2 prisoners. We had a meeting, a profiling meeting, where we all got brought into the chapel, and they're saying this is what we're going to do, and they said that they'd brought this profiler in from the private sector, and he'd worked out that it would take 2.36 officers to run a wing.
I can't believe it. This is almost as if you're banging your head against a brick wall every day. So they brought in a management consultant.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, and I
paid him a fortune. Paid him. I bet he'd been on more than £8 an hour, wouldn't he, James?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I this was just before we got privatised, and he basically stood up and said, we've worked out it takes 2.36 officers to run a wing, and I stood up and I got pretty much shot down for this, and I said, I'm no mathematical genius, and I certainly didn't do too well in biology. But I'm pretty much guessing when you're dealing with people, they've got to be full numbers. They've got to be full numbers. Who's this 0.36 of an officer? Because it don't sound very good.
Yeah, I get it, and you get it as well. It does if you. Yeah. But still, I mean, in a way, it's subtler than that, even, isn't it? Because it's about the idea that every unit is identical. So you need ex-officers for ex-prisoners. Yeah, of course you do. Yeah. What if ex-prisoners are asleep and ex-prisoners are rioting? You really need the same number of officers to deal with. I mean, even I can see that.
Yeah, I mean, we had a when I worked there. I mean, I've been assaulted numerous times. I had my face sliced with a razor blade. I had a bucket of feces thrown over my head on New Year's Eve. And to be fair, I was one of the liked ones.
So this is constant and normal. So the idea, I mean, I'm now seeing the riot as something that's always bubbling under the surface, but men and women like you somehow manage to screw the lid down. I guess that's why you're called Screws, is it? I don't know what the origin of that phrase is.
Yeah, I mean, some of it, believe it or not, I mean, some of the prisoners and me, we had a really good, we got on really well. We had a sort of agreement, whereas if, you know what I mean, they told the line and I was, you know what I mean, I was pleasant.
Of course, that doesn't surprise me at all. That's what you need to happen. Otherwise, it's going to be a revolving door and it's going to be a toxic atmosphere. You need to be rehabilitating people, and rehabilitation begins with humanity.
Yeah, it does. And the problem that you've got with the thing is as well, I mean, in this recent day and age, in this recent climate, we seem to be demonising anybody that's an expert in anything.
Yeah.
Basically, on the other cross side on the prison service, what they're getting too many people in the upper echelons of power that have never been on a prison wing, that they've never been on one. So my 4 governors, for example, 2 of them came from the banking sector.
Yeah.
1 of them came from an oil field, and the other one came from a facilities management company.
Is that right?
None of them, and they was running the prisons because they'd gone on this graduate scheme. And they'd spent 6 weeks on a wing. That was the only time they had to spend on the wing.
So when they get a message from Chris Grayling saying turn all the tellies off at 10 o'clock, they go, oh yeah, all right, that's a great idea. Anybody who's ever been on a wing for more than 20 minutes would say, well, number one, we can't do that. It'll take us an hour to do it because we've got to go from cell to cell. There isn't a sort of main switch to do it. And if we turn all the tellies off at 10 o'clock, they'll be howling the roof off by 11:30.
Yeah, I mean, it's a rent. I mean, basically, I mean, we used to have a saying in the prison, and a telly does the job of 10 officers.
Yeah, I know. I learned that from you. Not you personally, but from a former prison officer.
Yeah, and that's basically what happened. I mean, I got out this. I mean, I couldn't personally take it anymore.
Why not? What was the biggest challenge? I mean, was it a slow drip? Was it like boiling a frog? They cut this and cut that. I mean, and suddenly you look up and you've got half the number of colleagues for a third more prisoners than you had when you started.
Yeah, I mean, I had a guy who worked with us, and he was quite well liked by the prisoners, and the management quite liked him as well. And we basically, because we were good at his jobs, we always got put on the worst wings in jail. So we always got put on the discipline wings. And he was I mean, I don't think this is everything, but he was a cage fighter. He could handle himself. You know what I mean? He weren't scared of nobody. And I watched that guy cry like a baby. I actually sat there and watched him cry on a landing because he couldn't take it anymore.
Oh man!
It was his brother also worked in the prison system, and he ended up trying to commit suicide in a bubble one night on a night shift.
Oh Christ!
I mean, for another example, James. I mean, I had on my last week of my shifts, I had 22 15-minute suicide watchers, so they had to be checked every 15 minutes. But it took me 19 minutes to do the check. And I mentioned this to the governor. I said, "But you do realise that the time it takes to do the check is longer than what?" And my answer was, "That's not the attitude to have."
And that's why they hired him instead of someone that had spent time on the corridor, so that they can turn around and pretend that prisoners are widgets or barrels of oil or banking commodities.
It's crazy. I mean, pretty honest. I mean, the only time. This is a story that came out of the prison, and when some prisoners, James, I'll be honest with you, are bad eggs.
No, mate, listen, no one's here to pretend that they're all sweetness and light and victims of miscarriages of justice. And
they're not. But some of them have made bad choices. Some of them through no fault of their own. They've had no option. I mean, there was a chance. We had a riot in 2014 in the prison that I was in. It was a full-blown riot. It was we had everything. There was £2.5 million worth of damage. It was horrendous. And there was a female officer that was stood on the wings on her own, and she couldn't get off. It weren't on my wing. It was on a wing over. And 4 prisoners ran over to her, picked her up, covered her, and locked her in the cells with them so nobody could get to them. And I looked through the window and I thought, everything you read in the papers, that will never ever get printed. The fact that 4 prisoners have just saved their life, that will never ever ever get printed ever, because it doesn't fit
the narrative.
It doesn't fit the narrative. I mean, I loved that job. It was absolutely amazing.
Was there a breaking? I'm late for the news, and I just for anybody who gets irritated when I'm late for the news, if you do a subject like this and you're lucky enough to get someone like James calling in, the least you can do is pick his brains dry while you've got him here. Was there a breaking point, or was it just accumulation for you? It was
slowly dripping. Yeah. There was no staff, and then I got a bucket of feces thrown over me, and the words "Happy New Year" said over me.
Yeah, that's going to put you off most jobs, isn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, to be honest, I mean that happened. That was part of the job, and I know it's cynical, but that was part of the job, and it was to be expected. But when that happened, we ended up placing him on report, basically, a prison arrest, basically, put on a discipline charge, and he was placed on charge for assault. and the governor's turned round in the nick and said, "Oh no, that's not an assault."
Keeping a lid on it. And that dehumanises you. That insults you. That literally adds insult to the injury that you suffered. James, I'm moving on only because I'm late for the news. That's why I do what I do every day. What did I say to you? I don't know the answers to these questions, but I know what I have got: a switchboard. You can grab the phone line James has vacated by dialing 0345 6060 There are plans, of course, to recruit 2,500 more prison staff. I'll remind you after the news how many have left the profession since 2010. I'm sort of conscious of sounding like a stuck record, but in the next hour, when we turn our attention to the industrial action that's been taken across the country at the moment, how can you steer me away from the question I want to ask you, which is, surely you look at the prisons, that's what happens when you can't go on strike. All of these people calling for, it should be illegal to go on strike. Well, this is what happens when you can't go on strike. James in Sheffield describing to us circumstances in which a frog has effectively been boiled. And then you look at the numbers and you just begin, if you're even built vaguely to have a respect or a reverence for facts and statistics. We live in a country where, since 2010, the Conservative-led government has removed 13,720 staff from the prison service. Okay? And then they announced plans to recruit 2,500 prison staff as a solution to problems that are caused by the removal of 13,720. I want more of your calls on this, although I don't think there's anything particularly to make sense of. This is the way we are going, and we're going to accelerate, not slow down, unless people wake up and smell the coffee. The coffee is, if you take away a worker's rights to protest against the circumstances in which she works, she will end up with no rights at all. If you're a prison officer, that could equal death. A good day will be having a bucket of feces emptied over your head. A bad day would be murder. Do we care? No, we don't care. What are we getting cross about today? Striking post office workers and foreign aid. Ben's in Ilford. Ben, what would you like to say?
I've just been listening, and I think that I could feel quite. I left prison in 2014.
Yeah.
From a 2-year sentence, and I do feel bad for the prison officers, because the money is atrocious. Like, the money, you could get more working in a warehouse. Like, it's not, the money is. Is
that true? I presume it's true. I couldn't believe what the entry level salary was for a prison officer in this country, and you as a prisoner are aware of that. You see that and think, presumably, why do they do it?
Because there's certain times I'll go to sleep, and the officers will be there. I wake up, the officers they're there throughout the day. But their morale, I've noticed the morale. Like, most where I was, the prison, the govs and the prisoners, they got on quite well. But it's just the morale of the officers, because they're getting paid pence, and they've got the job, the amount of stuff they have to do in the job is tough, you know. So. But I blame the government personally, because they apply all these rules, but it's not them enforcing them. It will be the officers enforcing them.
And the officers are not allowed to say this is a really, really stupid idea. Or if they do say it, as our last caller reminded us, they get completely ignored. I mean, it's actually, from the outside, I mean, it's why I'm interested in speaking to you, because you've been inside. From the outside, it beggars belief until you see all the dots join and all the pennies drop, and you realise that, like everything else, they bring in people as governors because they think those people will be able to economically improve the situation, reduce costs, reduce staff, increase the number of prisoners. You're getting paid per prisoner. That's great news. If you privatise, that's more money for the shareholders. You look through the bars of your cell door and you see a profession in meltdown.
Yeah, I do. And I feel like the things like the TV, the thing they say it's like a holiday club. It's nowhere near.
I know some people still say that, but what do we have to do as a country just to move on from these ludicrous, outdated, utterly bogus cliches? Oh, prison's like a holiday camp. It's shocking, isn't it, really? When people...
Freedom, taking away a man's freedom is the punishment. That's what people need to remember. Taking away the freedom, that is the punishment. You don't take away his freedom and then, we're also going to, while you're here, we're going to take away your TV. Things like TV, and sometimes they say about PlayStation, you have to work hard for a PlayStation. It's not just given to you. It's not a right. You have to work hard. And these little things keep the relationship with the prison officers and the prisoners. It keeps them calm. It keeps them calm, and it keeps them out of trouble, and it makes them want to behave so they can earn these privileges. These privileges have to be earned. So in order to earn them, you have to be good. So it needs to be incentive. You need to have an incentive. And I feel
Of
like
course, to behave like everybody. I mean, even if we're going to infantilise you and treat you like children, you still get a sweetie if you're a good boy, don't you?
Yeah.
Would you do the job? Would you do the job if you were allowed to?
No, because seriously, they're risking their lives.
20 quid an hour?
Because, no.
50 quid an hour, come on, 50 quid an hour.
Yeah, £50 an hour, yep, I'll do it.
You're in there.
But
You'd risk your life for £50 an hour.
Yeah. not like that, but yeah, I think £50 an hour. But they need to be 16 grand a year. Like that can't pay, and it leads to other things like prison officers.
Corruption.
I know it's not all, but there's corrupt police officers bringing in these dangerous drugs, and they're making a fortune in prison.
Do you know what, Ben? I wonder how many go. Sorry, carry on. In the prison where you were.
In the prison where I was, there was the thing that you were saying, Black Mamba. That sells for £50 a gram. £50 a gram. People prefer this more than weed, more than Class A drugs, because it cannot be traced in your urine.
So it's not about the psychoactive effect it has on you. It's about its absence from drugs tests.
Yeah. So you can't be finding the drug test, but this drug here will turn you a psycho. I've seen it. I haven't personally taken it, but I've seen people collapsing, assaulting officers. It's this drug, but these drugs come in through the officers who aren't getting paid enough, so they need to earn some money on the side.
So you're making excuses a little bit, but I can see the logic in what you're saying. How much does it cost outside per gram? Do you know?
You could probably buy. I'm not quite sure, but it's fish tranquilizer. That's what it is. It's fish tranquilizer.
Are you sure?
Yeah, it's fish tranquilizer.
When do you ever need to tranquilize a fish?
I don't know, but it's fish.
What the hell are they doing? What the hell are they doing to these poor fish? Tomato tranquilizer. No, I only ask because 50 quid a gram. If it's 5 quid a gram on the outside, that's 45 quid for roughly the weight of a house fly. Ben, how close when you were there? Maybe you saw it, but how close is violence, generally speaking?
The violence where I was, it was like the brink. When I got out, it was like the brink of, because they was talking about bringing in the smoking ban. Things like this, the smoking ban, stuff like that will make people riot. Some of these people have nothing to lose. That if they do assault an officer or they do something far worse, some of them will not even spend any more time in prison. I've seen where staff have been assaulted, but where the person's doing a big sentence, it just gets run concurrent. So they do the one sentence. So
there's no punishment, and even if there were, it would involve being banged up for longer, and all of the problems that we're hearing about are because of there being too many prisoners and too few officers. So either you hire thousands more prisoners, or you stop sending people to prison for offences that they're currently being sent to prison for. Ben, thank you. So a former officer and a former prisoner, neither of whom would do the job for love nor money. That's not quite true. Ben would do it for 50 quid an hour. And who can blame him? But they're not going to get that. They're going to get about 8 when they start. And presumably this scheme to hire ex-squaddies to do it would involve a slightly better pay rate. But goodness me, you're almost turning into the kind of person that thinks we deserve what we've got. So stupid are we now collectively as a population. I don't just mean the obvious stuff, like voting for liars in referendums and things like that. I mean the choice that we all make every morning. Who are you going to care about today? Some Ethiopian pop star who may or may not be an ill-deserving recipient of foreign aid money? You're going to get cross about that? Or are you going to get cross about one of your fellow countrymen doing a job that you have neither the guts nor the instincts to do, having a bucket of feces emptied over his head by a prisoner, while also fearing for his very safety? And what happens when they come forward and say we're fearing for our very safety? You get columns written in newspapers by people coming up with witty names for health and safety, elf and safety concerns. Oh yes, because health and safety is meaningless. And you suck up these columns, and then you wonder why you've got a riot unfolding at a prison in Birmingham. And what happens if you can't go on strike? What happens if you can't take industrial action? The prison service. That's what happens. So what are we going to get cross about today? People who are on strike. It's so obvious when you join the dots in that way what's being done to us as a population, as a nation, as a people. You can't actually quite come up with a meaningful answer anymore as to why we're not protesting, why we're not objecting. I mean, we've got to find some way to blame foreigners for what's going on in our prisons, and then maybe we'd suddenly care. It's as if politics has, even by the standards of the 1980s, become a race to be meanest. Who can we be mean about next? And prison service suffering really highlights this point. Julie reminds us that many prisoners have mental health problems, a high proportion are illiterate or have learning difficulties, so she'd be much more impressed if the government was recruiting more teachers and mental health nurses to improve the chances of rehabilitation rather than ex-military to enforce discipline. Also, discipline implies a logical relationship between actions and consequences. If you are, and forgive me for employing a sort of slightly out-of-date lingo, but it's not something I'm up to date with. If you're off your face on Black Mamba, as it's been described to us by the last caller, you're not going to register the relationship between actions and consequences. They've taken millions of pounds and thousands of staff out of prisons. People like me sit sort of screaming on the sidelines about how insane this is. And then when stuff like this happens, they presumably plan to use it as proof that they should be doing even more of what they were doing already. That we should be having even fewer staff. We should be having even less money. Look at these prisons. They're a mess. How dare we give them money? Mail, how long ago was it? Incorrigible FCA has been keeping me up to date with the detail today, but I can't remember precisely how long ago it was that the Mail were running stories about prison being a holiday camp again. Weren't they? Because they found, I think, some photographs from one prison of some people. What were they doing? Baking a cake and smoking weed. I forget precisely what it was. Why do we swallow this? Well, actually, I'm not going to say why. I'm sorry. One of the main reasons I work at LBC is because historically so much of the audience is part of the problem that rather than the solution. Why do you swallow this? When somebody tells you, oh, prison's like a holiday camp, and then everybody else who knows what they're talking about tells you that it isn't. What is it inside you that makes you choose to believe the lie, the easy lie? Prison's like a holiday camp. Well, I don't quite get it. I try to see the other side of arguments, but maybe I'm trying too hard. Maybe it is just, again, yet more evidence that we don't like thinking. How are we going to solve the prison problem? Well, we need to look at mental health. We need to look at literacy. We need to look at adult education. We need to look at training and vocational impulses of staff. We need to pay staff more. We need to have more staff. We need to have a really proper deep think about education in prison and rehabilitation. We need to look at the circumstances in which people are, oh no, hang on a minute, James, that's all a bit complicated. And someone else comes along and says, how are we going to solve the problems in prison? Well, they're just like Butlins. We should lock them up and throw away. Oh, thank God for that. He's gone. That's all it is, isn't it? That's where we are. That's what Britain's turned into. We are now a country that hates thinking. I say it every day, whatever the subject is. What would you do? How are you going to fix prisons? Bring back the birch. Okay, yeah, all right, I can live with that. That makes sense. My tiny little brain can just about accommodate that suggestion. How are we really going to fix prisons? It's huge and complicated. It needs investment, it needs money, it needs staff, and it needs an appetite. Oh, sorry, that's far too complicated. I'm going to go with the birch bloke. He's a winner. Juliana is in London. Juliana, what would you like to say?
Oh, good. Hello, Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you, Juliana.
But not for other police, the police guards in prison. So I feel like, sorry, my English is not very good, but there's overcrowding in prison.
Yes.
And there's a lack of respect for prison guards in prison.
How do you know? How do you know?
How do I know? I'm married to a prison guard.
Okay, there you go.
And one of the major issues, you say, is the overcrowding is the issue and the lack of respect. And I find that for him, my husband,
yes,
he deserves as much credit as a member, someone in the military. There needs to be no compensation, but like compensation, whether in sort of monetary,
yes,
or more
rubbish pay and overworked.
Awful. It's disgraceful.
How much does your husband get paid? Can you tell me? What does he get an hour? Do you know?
At this moment in time, he gets £10 an hour. Now, Amazon warehouse workers get about £11 an hour during Christmas period.
So, yeah, sort of. I mean, we don't need to set one against the other, but it is incredible that looking after human beings gets you less money than looking after Christmas present. Exactly,
and it's looking after people who have been convicted. Okay, he's looking after people. He's protecting, society. He's looking after people in prison. Okay, he's stopping, not just feud, but he's protecting prisoners
from
each other, and have to keep a watchful eye. What my problem is, if there's an overcrowding of prisons and there's not many prison guards, okay, and they're being underpaid, okay, yes, I have a problem with that. Especially when
you
the
do.
government is making stupid, like, it's putting money into things like, for example,
Here we go.
in my area, it's silly, but they put money into this, the pavement, which was fine, but they won't put money into, paying my husband something that reflects what he does, like the importance of his job.
Does he get scared?
I have a problem with that.
Does he get scared?
And one thing he says is he's there to do his job. He doesn't, for me, when I speak with him, he's not scared. The problem is the overcrowding and the many hours that he has to work.
To make ends meet, because on £10 an hour he's got to do shed loads of overtime, and that is, I mean, a situation that many people listening to this programme will be familiar with, but they won't be running the daily risk of, I keep using this phrase because it trips off the tongue quite nicely, having a bucket of faeces emptied over their head on New Year's Eve. Juliana, I sense your frustration, and as a loving wife, supporter of your husband, we forget that you're part of this problem as well, aren't you? You suffer as well. You worry about him. The money, although he loves his job, he likes that, he's doing something that is productive. Like, does he? He does enjoy the job in some ways?
Yes, because he feels like he's, as a black man, he feels like, there's a funny sort of relation, now between, the police, whether police guard and
yes.
a black man. And
yes.
He say that he's, the reason why he got into the police guard role is because he wants to remove that, like, a kind of taboo mindset.
Wow. Yes, of course. And there'd be more use as well to black prisoners, because they'll feel somehow that they have something in common with him that perhaps a white officer wouldn't be able to understand some of the grievances. So the kind of person, in other words, the prison service would really benefit from having. I don't quite understand how we've got to 5 to 11 already. I honestly don't. I don't think I've had a sip of tea yet. And this is because the calls are so interesting. That's why we take a little longer with them than perhaps you do if you're just inviting people to ring in and shout an opinion at you and then move on. Juliana, thank you. Give my regards to your husband. Daniel is in Epsom. Daniel, what's going on?
Morning, James. We spoke in the summer about you said, what's the worst thing happening. I did say to you that I thought somebody may be killed. Unfortunately, they were. But just quickly, I tried to reapply to prison service after 10 years. I've been out 3 years, tried to reapply. And 2 weeks ago into assessment day, I failed in one area which was, I can't remember what it's called now. Reserve and judgment is one area I failed on. I passed the fitness test, I passed the math test, passed the English test, passed it.
Why do you want to go back in?
I enjoyed my time there.
But it sounds frightful.
It can be, but I want to see what it's like now. I suppose more curious than I was then. When I left, I suppose there was a lot of staff there who'd done a hell of a lot of time, much more I've done, 20 plus years. And I don't know if I presume it's a lot different now to what it was then. But it is exciting. It's the sort of thrill of working there. No 2 days are the same.
Well, that's true. I mean, it's not every day you get a bucket of faeces emptied over your head, is it?
No, that's definitely true.
Do you understand why they turned you down? I mean, did they give you an explanation? I know you know which category you
get an email. There's not even a phone call. It's just a blunt email saying you failed in this area. That's it. But you can, as I said to a researcher, you can apply and apply and apply until you get in. You think, keep applying until... Everybody can.
Until you pass the test?
Basically, yeah.
Are you going to do it again? I mean, I don't know quite what you're telling me. Are you telling me that it's too easy to get in or too hard?
I would say it's too easy.
Oh, okay. That's very generous of you and honest, given that you've just failed. But as you say, you'll try again and again and again. And that might be what happens next, is that we turn upon the guards and talk about the calibre of recruiting. And that would be disgusting. But that's what Britain is becoming now. A country where we do not look for answers. We search for scapegoats until we find one. And then we all pile in, pretending that that's an answer to the problem that we're discussing. Scapegoats. Answers to everything. Terry's in Daventry. Terry, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James. You all right?
I'm very well, Terry. What's on your mind? Nearly got a Brian then, didn't I? Nearly got a Christmas Brian.
Sorry about that.
That's all right, mate.
So I'm a prison officer for 10 years.
Yes.
I left 6 months ago to become a carer for my disabled stepson. Everybody that is in that job is disgruntled, from officer up to about middle management. Beyond that, senior management, happy as Larry.
And why is that? You're the second officer recently resigned, removed officer who's told me that. Why is that?
Oh God, do you know what? I don't really know where to start. In my time as an officer, in my time there, I've had buckets of poo thrown in my face twice.
Yeah.
I've had
Is this
paint
top
thrown in
trumps
my
now?
face.
Is this you're going up against James in Sheffield and saying, I'll see your bucket of feces and I'll raise you another. I've had 2 buckets of poo thrown over my head.
I'm just telling you. No, I'm not proud of it.
I know you're not.
And I'm not bragging. That,
It'd be weird if you were.
Just trying to paint a picture of what your daily life can be like.
Absolutely.
And it is rare that this happens. I'll be honest with you. And 90% of the prisoners that you meet, you do get on with. But occasionally you get, you come across one that will frighten you.
Yes.
And I mean frighten you. And when there's only 2 of you on a landing with 100 prisoners,
2, yeah.
2 of you on evening association with 100 prisoners out, and you've got a guy kicking off at the office door because I don't know, he was promised a new mattress today and it didn't arrive.
Yeah.
Again,
Yeah.
sort of thing.
Yeah.
And he's taking it out on you, and you're doing your best to calm him. That can be pretty frightening, I can promise you. You know, I've got 2 broken ribs that I never had before.
What do you feel then? Because the news is just literally round the corner. But when you read about prisons are a holiday camp and this, what do you feel?
Right, prisoners. There's 3 basic.
No, I haven't got time for that. Give me the gut shot. Give me in a sentence. How the hell has this been allowed to happen to your former profession?
It's 2 things, right? It's lack of staff, right, which is bad for staff morale and makes them. You give up in the end. You give up.
I know how you feel. I'm going to take a second guess at what the other one is. Too many prisoners. And then, of course, the lack of staff is not going to be enhanced by the lack of money. I want some more of your stories on this because I'm learning, and I'm sure everybody else listening is as well.